Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Real Talks podcast with Wexford Diarmuid Lyng. From an early age, it was obvious that Diarmuid was going to develop into a considerable force on the hurling fields of Ireland, as he was one of those unique talents who could, at times, produce moments of magic through the hurl in his hand. He wore his county jersey for a number of years, but after capping the side for 2 years in 09 and 2010, his relationship with the game had soured. In search for answers about himself, his relationship with the game and many other things, Diarmuid packed his bags and travelled the world. On that journey, which included a stay in a Buddhist temple, he found some of the answers he was looking for, but the reality was he was also left with even more questions. The main reason I record and share this podcast each week is that I passionately believe in the power of sharing life lessons, and I've no doubt that anyone listening to this conversation will relate to Diarmuid's honesty and perspective in some way. My name is Alan O'Mara, and you are listening to episode 17 of the Real Talks podcast.
Oh, it's a poor ball. He's given it to Sean Murphy. Neatly in here. Oh, what a response there by Diarmuid Lyng. Well, this is a player who's playing in his 25th match today in the championship. Missed all of last year when he was away, but he's come back, and he's come back with a bang. And it's 1-2 to 1-2, and there are 14 minutes gone in the match.
I was going to kick off the conversation, and I suppose, and we're just jumping straight in with hurling to start off with, and we'll spin off from there. But I suppose hurling as a game is something that's revered in terms of the warrior spirit, the beauty of it, the passion of it. And I just wanted to just actually simplify it for the start of this conversation. Just go back to the very start for yourself and being a young guy picking up a hurl, what it was like in those younger years, what drew you in, how did it feel, what was it about hurling that made you want to go, I want my go at that?
It's interesting doing this. We're here in Crow Park and looking down the pitch, and it's definitely changed. Like, I remember going to Wexford games in the 80s, and we'd always bring the hurls, and my father would stay out on the field with us afterwards, and that was a normal thing. Like we at 5 o'clock or 5:30, I don't know what time games run out, maybe at 3 on a Sunday at that stage. After this was the 80s, so it was our regular beatings that we got from Kilkenny and Offaly at the time, and we just go out on the field afterwards and play around, and it just always seemed like the perfect canvas. Like it was a place where it's a dream, like it's a distant dream at the time, or it's an idea, or it's hard to know what really it is inside you, but it's definitely there, and you're playing there, and it's not disconnected from where you think you're going, but you have no language to put on where you think you're going at the time. But it translated definitely onto the field. I played with Clonard when I was a young fella, a club in Wexford Town, and they're a junior club, a small club in town, and in Wexford Town, Fight Harriers would be the big team, and they'd produced great hurlers over the years, and Larry O'Gorman was the big star at the time, and so there was no doubt about who was kind of the king of Wexford Town in terms of hurling. But for us, my father was very involved with Clonard, and we were the kind of underdog from an area called Coolcots, and it was a mixed kind of an area in terms of social class, and hurling was just a great equaliser in that we just all went and played, and we had a kind of an open door policy in our house where I can remember times coming home from Thomastown where my mother's family are from, and we would literally get home on a Sunday night and there would be people in our house watching old videos of league games that Wexford were playing at the time, like that we had just recorded, and my father would play, and they knew to come down and they'd put the video in, and there could be 5 or 6 12-year-olds sitting in our sitting room watching league games. And so I think it just never wasn't, it was always just there. And I think my father's family are all handball. My granduncle is Dick Lyng, who has All Irelands and World Championships in handball, and so that was the big draw early on. And I went and played in a handball championship one year. Jeez, I got beaten 21-0, 21-1, and I hung my head in shame with the great handball Lyng name. I had disgraced it all at once. And I can remember coming back, and Kieran, my younger brother, he basically told me, how shit I was. And my father put him out of the car and said, you can walk home. And
brotherly
Kieran
love.
yeah. Kieran he was headstrong at that age too, and he was just like, fine, I will walk home. I'm not getting in the car with him, he's shit anyway. And so, yeah, I realised that handball wasn't my game, I suppose, early, but it provided great handball, like the wall and the hurl is the old phrase, like the handball alleys. And I went on to St. Peter's College, where it was big. Like 60 by 30 is obviously the big alley, but I think the ones in St. Peter's College could be bigger again. Well, they seemed like ginormous places at the time, and in there, the knowledge of the angles from handball and the dexterity that went along with handball, like that was definitely there as well. It just was there was a lot of effortlessness in the handball alley when it came to hurling in the handball alley, and so I just got lost in that for a few years really in secondary school, because it just felt so natural to be in it. But it was always training for, everything that I was doing, I suppose, was, and no different to anybody else who plays the game. Like, it's always just preparation. It's always training for. You always know there's a bigger picture, but I feel now that I was blessed to just really enjoy those parts of it, because it wasn't really preparation for to the forefront of my mind. Like, when I look back now, I realise it was all preparation. But at the time, it wasn't like a drivenness, or it wasn't like, I have to do this to get to where I have to get to. It was just like, this makes sense to every cell in my body, and there was just no. I don't think I've ever walked off a field or walked out of a handball alley or wherever you'd played a game not wanting to hit one more ball. Like, and that's a nice thing to feel every day. Like, that, like as a coach, or when you're working with teams now, I definitely feel like cut them off. Sometimes you cut them off and cancel the training or stop the training before the end, or what they think is the end, so you leave them hungry for the next day. Just stop it early, a little bit earlier than they expect. So it gives them a basis on what they should be trying to achieve in a game or in a training session. Because if you cut it short, like, I didn't get to do that thing that I really wanted to do, and it creates that hunger. But that was always just naturally there. And so it was here, Crow Park, in those experiences of watching. Like, I can remember my father just leaping off the chair for a goal that Wexford scored, I think maybe against Offaly in 87. Like, to see unbridled emotion in your father like that, like, is just I don't know what it does to you, but it definitely, you just think, okay, this surrounding, looking at people around you who really were in it, they were fully in it. They weren't holding back anything. They weren't thinking about anything. They were just in the game, and they were in the rhythm of the game, fully present in it. No choice but to be present in it. It was a demand to be present in it, because the intensity of the game at the time really was all or nothing in those championship games, And yeah, that's a nice thing to be taken in by.
Yeah, it's really, I suppose, like, the connection aspect of that, I think, comes across really strong there, in terms of, be it with family, friends, or with teammates. But on the opposite side of that, one of the things you would hear, particularly hurlers, speak about is that the alley and the ball and the wall. So while obviously our games are predominantly team sports, and you're together and you're training, and I always find it really interesting when hurlers really draw on those memories of probably times when you're on your own in the alleyway. And was it something that you did in your own, even at a younger age, where you went and it was just that time for yourself, or was there always, say, a couple of you banging around hitting balls off wall, or was there even from a younger age where there was a bit of, I suppose, not escapism, but just a place where you go to just be present and do that thing?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, because in the different moments that kind of flash to mind, like, there's a street league in the area that I grew up in Wexford, when I was, I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I was always playing way ahead of my time, because I was the game came really, really naturally to me from a young age. And so the team thing was always the basis of it. Like, you always understood that the game didn't really exist. Like, this was a time before under 6s and 7s. Like, you kind of started under 10s or maybe under 12s, and so you kind of had to start young. But the only outlet really was was the game, you know, and training and that. And I saw my older brother Davey, who went on to play with Wexford up until minor. He was very individualistic about it, in a sense that he would, like, Jenny broke the hearts of our neighbours in town. He used to draw. He used to get chalk from school. I'm assuming he asked for it, but he took chalk from school anyway. It was in Wexford town, you know, asking for anything. Certainly not chalk, but he used to take chalk and then he'd draw pitches the whole length of the street. Like, when I think about 100 yards, like, down the street
with
that we
chalk
lived on in town, and he would have the small square, the goal, the 14, the 21, the 40, the whole way up the street, and then he'd relive everything that he saw here. And so I was a little bit more. I'm the second child, and sure, as is the case for the second child, like, he took all the hardship, and I got away with. I was kind of come in under his umbrella, and I had a bit more, I think, freedom, and I just wasn't as taken with the game in that sense. I was kind of trying to explore explore things a little bit, but still loved playing the game. But that intensity definitely wasn't there at that age, and the times of individuality, I suppose, that you're talking about, like, where you just that escape or getting lost in it. The alley provided it in a way, but at the time it was never really to the forefront of my mind of an escape. It was always just this is something we're all doing. Now, I remember I noticed, all right, when I was a young fella, I maybe 12 or 13, when we had the crew of lads that we played with, and I realised, like, it became known to me, because I didn't realise before it, because we were playing a lot, but it became a kind of, it just made sense to me that I was too rough with the other lads. My intensity had gone up a level, and I wanted, you know, there was more ferocity in what I was doing, and they were still playing, but I wasn't playing anymore. I was now,
it's more competitive.
It was getting more, I was obviously taking steps up in that of going where I wanted to go, and that was a kind of a shift that I probably noticed, all right. But other than that, it always felt pretty natural to be just in the rhythm of the game with teammates and stuff.
From those memories there we're laughing at, and, like, you know, things do evolve, and it's a game you stick at and obviously progress at and develop with, which brings you into, as I said, ultimately into the Wexford senior panel. And I think you made your debut in 2004, was it? I know, as I said, I was skipping through clips and stuff last night. So I suppose, what's your, coming from that place of joy as a young kid playing, and sort of, I suppose, discovering the beauty of hurling, maybe is a nice way to describe it. So then, how does that compare to when you enter into that setup and you become sort of probably a figure, or you basically get to a place that you probably thought about a lot growing up? Have you?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So what was that like?
You know, when I think there was times definitely from minor on, like, I played here in a minor Leinster final against Kilkenny, and the ball dropped under the Hogan stand, which was the old Hogan stand at the time, and I was nervous, you know, my body was nervous. I was overcome with the occasion, really, and I pulled, and I think it might have, I'm not sure it was Jackie Tyrrell, I never asked him, but I think it might have been Jackie was cornerback, and he flicked the ball above, and I just pulled, and I pulled late, and I pulled straight up into him, and I got a yellow card, or I got a booking at the time, maybe it was, and now this was about 7 minutes gone, and I was already booked, and I suppose Liam Griffin was manager at the time, and he could see I was a little bit chaotic looking, I'd say, and I got hauled ashore after 15 minutes, like. Right. And when that happens, a lot of people around you start to doubt your ability to deal with the pressure and to deal with to deal with a big occasion, because it is a big occasion, particularly when you hold it in your mind's eye as something from a very young age, and you make the occasion a lot bigger.
There's a huge emotional attachment to it. Like,
it's hard to ground it, you know, in some kind of reality. Like, it can just get lost on you, and so it did definitely for me. And I think, and then when another few games over the following years of under 21, and we'd successful under 21 years in 01 and 02. If I played badly in a big game, that kind of, I could feel that around me, like from my, you know, teammates or family or whatever, like that little bit of distrust in my ability to deal with the big occasions. So coming in here in 2004, I was against Cork in the All-Ireland semi-final, and I was straight on over on the hill 16.
What age are you now for that?
I'm 22 maybe,
Right.
20, maybe 22 or 3.
Still a very young man, like.
Straight and slight as well, because I'd spent time in America the year before, and I wasn't physically, I hadn't rebuilt myself up to the level that the game was only kind of starting to really get very physical, I suppose, on the back of the 95 or that kind of 96 on, when Wexford used it and other teams began to use the physical development. So to get bigger, and like I didn't think I was fit to be even on the panel. I felt that weak, I wasn't strong enough. So when I came on of course on Sean O'Halpine. They were like 10 points up, and I was just like, how did I find myself here? And I saw it in the following day in the paper. I guess they used as the story of the game, because Cork beat us by about 20 points.
Yeah.
There was a picture of me, and I had the ball. I think the one time I had the ball in half, and Sean Og was around me, and he honestly looked about 3 times the size of me, and there was 4 other Cork lads around, and I was just like a chap, like a little. But I went out and ran back and forth across the 45, because that was our technique, our game plan at the time. We bet Kilkenny we devised our own game plan. Damien Fitzhenry called a meeting of the players, and we devised our own game plan coming up to the Leinster final, because the Kilkenny half back line was just, it couldn't be beaten, Right. And little did we know, we're coming up against the Cork half back line just starting off as well. But I remember, to try and counter their dominance in the air, when Fitzy would start to his run up to puck the ball out, we'd sprint across the field and try and use our fitness to be timing our runs to land. And I had been timing my run for a long time. The high catch was the skill that I most admired. I'd followed George O'Connor when I was a young fella. Like, I didn't think there was anything you could do more beautiful in the game than just
Pluck one out of the sky.
With a forest of hurls around you. I just thought that was really where it was at, And so I felt kind of ready for it. And they started Paul Colley, I remember the day, and sure, the experience Paul had. Now, at the time, he didn't really have the fitness to cover the ground. But I got on at half time, and I said, right, I'm on probably the fittest human being in the country here, but I am going to run back and forth as much as I can. And I ran into Mitch Jordan, who was on our team, and I ran over the sideline at one stage. I just wanted to, and Sean Og, like, I think was to pick up somebody else, or they were kind of saying to me to pick up the other wing. I can't remember who it was. But Sean Og was he was following me a little bit, I think, first, because he was like, gosh, this will
little spring chicken here.
We'll get to the rest of the half out here pretty easily, And so then he saw that I just couldn't stop. I physically couldn't stop running. I think I was so excited. And I think after a while, he's like, okay, whoever it was, you can take him off my hands. I don't want to be running after him anymore, because I wasn't even really running towards the ball or anything. I just was running, So that was the exuberance of it. And I think after that, the following year we played Kilkenny here in a Leinster final, and we were beaten by 4 points, and probably should have beaten them. We were up 1-7 to a point after about 15 minutes, and there was a big turnaround with, I think, Adrian Fenlon got injured in about the 25th minute, and they got a few scores back. Owen Quigley scored a point from halfway over his shoulder on the bounce in the same game. It was the best point I've ever seen scored, and that I played well in that, and I felt a confidence and a strength begin to come into my game. And so when people began to doubt at any stage after that, I just didn't it didn't register with me anymore, because I knew that I could come here and play well, and I was working things out in the game in a different way than I could see maybe people around me doing it, or wasn't necessarily encouraged to do it. Like I marked Martin Comerford here that day, and I chatted to him afterwards. We went on a trip to Boston, and we were chatting about it. He was just like, I don't know what you were thinking, like, but down here in front of the canal end on the Hogan stand side, as their goalkeeper was pucking the ball out, I knew Comerford had, I don't know, like 8 inches on me, like he was a good half foot taller than me, if not more, stronger, more experienced, better catching it. Like, he had everything on me, really, and so I didn't know what I was going to do with him. But I worked out that I've always been amazed by the fact that a goalkeeper pucks the ball out, and within about, like, when you look at the sheer mechanics of a catch, like, within about 2 seconds, you can stand in basically the right spot with your hand up in the air.
Where it's going to land.
And this little ball will land in this little small circle of space. Now, you won't be directly able to do it, but you won't be far off. And that's within about the first 2 to 3 seconds. So you're talking about, like, the power of the brain to work this stuff out. It just blows my mind. So I was thinking the whole thing with Martin and with Kilkenny lads at the time was positioning. Like, I used to like the run, the jump, play the hurl, catch the ball. That was kind of the technique. You'd let them think they were going to catch it, and then you'd come up from behind and played their hand or played a hurl. And I was like, he's getting his positioning in those first 2 seconds. He knows where he wants to be in those first 2 seconds. So as the ball is being pucked out, I'd put the hurl across his eyes, just put it over in front, and he'd flick it with his hand, and then I put the hurl back over again. And those 2 seconds destabilised him enough that he couldn't get the position. That was my chance to kind of. And once he didn't catch it, I didn't need to catch it. I was happy enough, So getting to work those problems out and then taking them onto the field and seeing that come to fruition was like, okay, this is fine. Like I can do this. But definitely felt. I was wing back at the time, and Liam Dunn had just retired, and I was essentially in his jersey, and it felt the way, even though maybe Wexford wouldn't have been highly respected at the time, I felt the great weight of expectation of playing for Wexford, and the respect I had for former players was all in the melting pot as well, and was a great kind of driving force.
Like taking that. So going from that space of, like, I was sort of laughing as you were recalling that day against Cork, because there's a real, like, it's a naivety and it's a exhilaration and exuberance, and it's all the real positive emotions, I suppose, that you like. If you look at a game as a kid, or you look at a game, you say, that's what I want my kid to feel if he plays, or that's what it's meant to feel like. Or I suppose what you'd like it to be like. And I suppose, and the example you've given there from the game against Kilkenny, so it's quite obvious that you're quite a deep thinker about the game, probably a deep thinker in general. We might come to that as we go on. But I suppose by the time, say, 2009, 2010 roll around, you've been the captain of the team for 2 years, and you've referenced the expectation there, starting to feel that. And by the end of that 2010 season, has your relationship changed a little bit in terms of how you're viewing it or how you're feeling about shouldering that?
Yeah, it had changed, but it changed by my own. I suppose I had made a choice in 2007 to do something, and it had a huge impact on my life. Like, I got into the cryotherapy chamber, and I've talked about it plenty, and I don't want to go back into it, but I made this choice, a blind choice, the kind of blind choice that I think we're susceptible to sometimes as athletes, because we're not maybe questioning enough of what's going. What if you take a step back from what it was like? Okay, at the time it was like, you'll heal an injury and you'll get to play against Tipperary in a couple of weeks' time. Whereas, like, if you kind of stood back from it, for me at the time, maybe my energy was low and I was going into a room that was minus 120 degrees, like, and even how natural is that? And also, if your body if I had a hamstring injury, like, it's because I was pushing it too hard, or I wasn't training in the right way, or there was something, I wasn't sleeping enough or drinking enough water or whatever. But so the natural process was never allowed to take hold, or I never had any respect for the natural process. I never had any respect for the natural rhythm of my body. I just did what everybody said you kind of should do, and this is what you do to get back right. But I kind of think there should maybe a little bit more value put on the natural process. And if you do need 6 weeks off, you take the 6 weeks off and allow your body to heal fully. And just now, there's an idealism in that. I know you want to get back out there, you want to play these games. So I understand what was driving it. But anyway, I went into the cryotherapy chamber, and that just wrecked my body. My system froze. I couldn't hold food down. I couldn't drink. I couldn't sleep. And I went out and played against Tipperary here, and we beat Tipperary the same year. 2007 was a fantastic year for us, but I was taken to the cleaners. I was
You're just not dead at it. You're not at it.
And that continued. Like, I think we have a great thing here. Maybe it's a human condition. We always think these things are Irish, but there's this thing of like, Asher, it'll be grand, and it gets better when you're at. I was down to maybe 20%, I'd say, of my functionality, and it went up to 40 or 50%, and so that was way better than 20 at least. You kind of it becomes a new normal for you. You're just like, okay, it's on the way up, and you're fine. And I was trying loads of different things and alternative things, and I was going to doctors, and I was taking every antibiotic that was prescribed, and I kept going to different doctors, and they kept giving me more antibiotics, and they kept giving me more stuff, and everything was destabilizing me more. And so by the time I carried that into 2008 and 2009 and 2010, and I could see that my numbers were changing. I wasn't hooking and blocking as much, and I wasn't as fresh, and the exuberance was just, I wasn't thriving anymore. And so the game became more of a penance. Like, I was feeling the weight of expectation, and feeling the weight of pressure.
And is there a natural frustration there in that you obviously feel as if you can't do what you'd like to be able to do?
Oh yeah, for sure, completely. You can see, but it's what you don't even see, because you're in a cloud of your own misery in a way. So you don't really see what you can't imagine the great things that I could imagine before. Like I wasn't, like, for example, taking a small part of the game, like Martin coming for catching the ball and breaking down a puck out and seeing what to do with that, was a really natural thing a few years before. Whereas at that stage, then a few years later, it was just like, okay, like, can I just survive this game without,
So I was just going to ask you a question on that, because I was thinking as you were speaking there. You talk about that identity and that need to play and the want to play and the desire to play, and said the short term thinking of, okay, someone suggested to do that and that will help me get back playing. But I suppose to feel that way for a prolonged period of time, I suppose the thing that I was curious about was, you referenced the 40% marker there. In that moment when it's happening, are you very aware that you're only 40% and you're just trying to, not con, but you're just trying to elude the people around you? Or are you actually managing to con yourself into thinking like, I'm able for this, I'm all right, like? Do you get me?
I do, yeah. I think I do anyway. We'll see when I answer if I get you or not. The first word that came up inside me as you were saying it was shame. When you're part of a panel and you see the effort that goes in and you see the things that people are doing around you to get to the level that they're at, and when you're suffering from something that's kind of invisible except in the manifestation of it on the field, I always felt like I was being dishonest with them, or I always felt like I wasn't doing what I should be doing, and so it was very hard to. I was just in a cloud of my own misery, really, like, and so you're not thinking straight. And look back now, I mean, I see so clearly what was wrong, and I said, if I just could have given myself a little bit of peace and quiet for a little while, like, that would have resolved at least something, and it would have allowed me maybe to see a pattern and to see a way out or whatever. But the processes of the mind had just become entrenched, and so it was just a constant battle for energy, or to seem like I had energy, or just a chance to play kind of freely. And sometimes it would open up. I remember I got a Kangen water machine. Well, I tried this Kangen water machine out, and it's for what's it called, for the ions. It makes the ions. It puts a charge into the ions, basically, and it increases the pH of them, and this then goes into your body in a kind of a more efficient way. And so I tried this out for like a month, and I did that, and I drank this water, and I was on top of the world after. Now it cost $3,000 or something to buy the bloody machine. So at the time, I couldn't afford it. Yeah. And I didn't know if I bought, maybe the month of it was fine, but if I bought the machine, I didn't know, like, there's no guarantees really, like, that it was that was the thing, or how big was it a difference, because there's kind of a placebo effect at times. And then I go to acupuncturists and go to these people who opened parts of my body up, maybe that freed up a little bit of energy. So, okay, here I am, I'm back, I have it, like, I've sorted it out, that's grand. Then after a couple of months, it'll fall by the wayside again. So it was just a kind of it was a very clouded period that I'm still only coming out of. Like, it's still,
that's what's going on. Have you made sense of that in terms of what exactly was going on with your body and like?
I have, I've definitely made sense of it now, all right. But at the time, no, not at all, not really. It's more, you make sense of it now, definitely. But there's just a legacy that kind of follows on from it that is a little bit harder to shake off. Like, you go down, when we look at neuroplasticity, and you see that the wiring of your brain can change based on the thought processes that you go down. Like, like with the picture of a tree, like, and the trunks and the branches that come off, the ones that grow biggest and strongest are the ones the fluid keeps going down. And I think I see the mind like that. So if I'm thinking, if I'm coming training and my first thought is dread, or how am I going to be tonight, or if I'm fearing something, I'm feeding that part of my brain that message all the time, and so that synapse gets stronger and stronger and stronger, and that's so that you literally change the wiring in your brain, I think, and that's what I had done. And until you kind of learn how to step back away from that and observe it, it's very, very hard to change it, and probably impossible to change it until you realize it's just a pattern you're following, and that you can observe yourself following it, stand back, see what you're doing, and then change it, and then you rewire your software a little bit, like by doing that, you know.
Like with all that going on and all those questions and all those things that you've tried and searches for solutions and so you make a decision that you're going to go on your travels.
This will sound terrible now, but Carlo bet us in the league, and I was like, okay, that's
like,
it. I'm done. Like I'm done. And,
done with this.
And we scored maybe 112 or 13, and I scored 110, I think, and I just felt that it just wasn't there, you know. It just wasn't there. He stayed on till the summer and then left.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt your question.
No,
you're
fine.
That was that day in Dr. Cullen Park when they beat us.
It just reached a stage that was like, I can't do this anymore.
I couldn't do it. It wasn't happening for Wexford at the time either, and I didn't feel hugely supported in like I was putting way too much pressure on myself and just really dragging it, you know, as hard as I could out of myself, and so it was unrealistic to expect that from the fellas around me, and a frustration built inside me, and I knew something has to give here, you know, and so I left.
So that decision to go away, so like I'm guessing from, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's a party that just wants to get away from that environment, certain people, that just to get a natural mental break from it. I suppose there probably is another party that just wants to see different parts of the world maybe and open up your mind. But that decision, I suppose, to go away, I think so. You've covered over there sort of where it came from, but is for me trying to pick up on that decision to go away in that journey. Is that about getting some me time and trying to connect with yourself? Because you've mentioned there pulling and dragging and draining yourself for others and people around and trying to force yourself to do things. But was the rationale there to just, this is the time for me?
There was very little rationale there, to be honest. Like you're still in the cloud and you're trying to make decisions from the cloud about how to resolve the cloud, but I mean, you're in it, so it's very hard to know, you know. And at the time, it's just fate, this karma, whatever people understand it to be, like, or it's just the music of what happens. It's just what happens, and you go along with it. I was going out with a girl at the time from America because I'd spent time in Annapolis in Maryland when I was a young fella. When I was in my 20s, myself and Owen Quigley went before we started playing for Wexford, and I met this girl there at the time, and she had been back over here and studied and worked over here for a couple of years, and I kind of wanted to give that a go and move over. And it was always a big thing, like, you know, for an Irish man at, you know, 28 in my prime to move somewhere for a girl, like, and leave hurling was it didn't sit well with me, because I was so aware of myself at the time and wasn't as solid in myself at the time to be able to deal with the kind of public scrutiny of that. And that's now what a
perception of it,
to make that decision, you know. But I needed to escape, I suppose, and I could see that, and I was trying to make something work that wasn't really realistic either, and dragged her. And that's the other thing, you know, you drag people through the mire of your own struggles then too,
because you're trying to get yourself into a different world, not like metaphorically, but also literally as well. I guess
I kind of mean for, and I think this is definitely when in as part of like what masculinity, or as part of being men in Ireland today, like, and or over the last few years, and particularly in sport, because that dynamic is there of the group of men, you know, a group of young men, and there was, I was in such huge uncertainty, but it's like you don't feel like you're permitted to be uncertain in it, because we're supposed to have stuff figured out.
Yeah, just to pretend you have a master plan and going here and have it all sorted.
I felt like I was kind of an adult now. This was before I realised the adults don't really know what's going on either. I thought they did at this stage, and so I was like, it wasn't happening for me in that way, and I was clutching at straws, and I dragged her through the mire, and I've got serious regrets over that, because this is because of my, you see, this is the thing, you know, and I look in now as a hurler and what happened at Croke Park and all these things. This is this culture legacy here that you're a tiny part of, but yet you're a part of it. But in the real world, you know, there's real consequences to these things that happen, like. And for me, that was to affect a really beautiful human being who I didn't have the awareness of at the time, because I was just lost in my own kind of battle. So there was repercussions to it, and I've got regrets. But like, you move past that, and you realise, look, that's part of your growing and your knowing, and you get over it. So that didn't work out as it wasn't really going to work out, because I was so uncertain. And I went up to New York and worked for about 7 months up there and played ball up there, and and just saved up a big sum of money and went off. I remember lodging like 10 grand into a bank machine in Vegas. I was the only one lodging money in Vegas probably, but like I just had all this cash on me from working,
Right.
and I knew that was what I was going to just travel with, and so wherever I wanted to go,
That was the pot.
I was just going, and that was really kind of enjoy it. And so that was a great experience, and I was blessed to get to do it, and look back in at Wexford and how they were going, and definitely felt the unease with my decision and all that stuff. But I was still in the midst of a big battle, so it wasn't really there was no option or thought process around going home. But that came to an end then when I was in Vietnam. I was going up the coast of Vietnam, and I'd met these 4 or 5 Dutch people, and I was kind of making my way with them. I was on my own at the time, and it was a lovely experience. I was reading Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, and I turned to the last page and was like, right, something just landed in me, and I was like, I'm done. Like, this thing you're looking for around the world isn't around the world, it's in you, and it's at home, and you have to go home and you have to face that. And so I decided, right, I was in around February, I think, in 2012, and I said, right, I'll go.
So how long had you been? So you'd done a stint in New York, or you'd done a stint in America, but how long had you been sort of, say, nomad, travelling around the place, just sort of bouncing?
It's about a year and a half, I'd say, at this stage. Yeah, I'd say.
As you said, there's a sense of that you're going to other places hoping to stumble across an answer. That's not how it works all the time.
No, to surely not. And went to, and got. I was delighted with some of the places that I got to see. Places.
Give us a list of those, just to give someone listening a sense of sort of place that you went to. And I
see, like, I'm the places. Some of the places. It was a lot actually in Europe, just bouncing around Europe actually towards the end, but definitely Tibet and Nepal and China and Thailand and Vietnam and Russia and places like that were interesting places to be. And Tibet was definitely the highlight because it's just such a different world. You're up in the Himalayas, and these people are just so incredibly beautiful. Like and then you're faced as well, and we're in a similar crisis ourselves, only we're a lot further on the road. The Tibetan people were just being crushed by the Chinese, by capitalism, and they had their kind of, feudalist ways, and it didn't make sense what was happening. I took a lovely video one day, actually, not a lovely video, it just highlighted the contrast when I was up in a temple in Tibet, and there was these young, I guess 15 or 16, now it's probably arguable whether they should be working or not, but they had plastered this floor, and so they were, I guess, I don't know, would you roll it here, but they had these little cement, flat pieces of cement of some sort. It was more solid, obviously, than cement, because they had poles on them, and they were banging them down off the ground to level the floor off. So this is backcountry, it's not going to be perfect. But there was a line of 10 on one side and a line of 10 on the other side, and they'd walk forward and bang the sticks going forward, bang the cement off the cement to level it off. But they were singing as they went, they were singing as they were working, and they'd come into a line one side singing, and then they'd go back and stop, and then the other line would come in and they'd be singing, and they were all singing their way through their day, and it was just so, they were light and they were vibrant, and it was just really a lovely experience to be there. And I went in amongst them, I was chatting to them, and it was really great, And then I went down maybe the following morning. I woke up and was down, and we were strolling along the street where these shopping centres now are starting to spring up to, the idea is to breed the Tibetans out, that's their plan. And there was a beautiful one of those shops, that we have here too, where everything is pristine and perfect, and the stuff costs amounts of money that has no way relation to what it costs to make it, and all that stuff. And there was 2 young Tibetan girls working in that shop, and they were just a picture of misery. There was no vibrancy, there was no conversation, there was no beauty in their being at the time, because there was nothing there for them. They were just kind of. Yeah, whereas the more physical thing that you would assume would be less enjoyable was actually, there was much more life in it. So you get to see those things. People, homelessness at the moment in Ireland. I mean, we're under, it's really, really, I don't know what adjective you use to describe the situation, because it's, it almost feels like it would be an insult to the people who are going through it. But to see people asleep under these made up beds in these shops like Harrods or I don't know where they are, like these perfect rooms where there's, you know, and then to see someone asleep on the street out under it in the cold, you know. So I guess you just get to see what's really happening in the world away from the bubble of GA and of country life in Ireland, and it gives you a deeper appreciation for what's actually going on around you, you know.
Yeah, it quite clear, like it obviously very clearly sort of broadens your own horizons, and in terms of from your own perspective getting out of that bubble. One of the particular strands I was going to just ask you about, because it was something that I was sort of I noticed as I was reading through, is I'm right in saying you spend a week in a sort of in a Buddhist temple in terms of meditation, and so because the thing that struck out with me, because obviously you spoke very honestly there around sort of the questions that you're asking yourself, and you are looking for answers, and you're trying to find solutions to questions and problems. Exactly, and most of us are in some way, shape, or form. But for someone with all that going on their head to submit themselves into a meditation place for a week, so like there's two theories. So one, you can say you can sit there and you can try, because so first of all, I'm going to ask you to explain what that was like, but just I suppose coming from the two different mentalities. So if you're ask yourself all these questions and there's stuff going on in your head, and you go say you're going to travel the world, so you have two choices: you can distract yourself and like go to look at all these nice things and try and avoid thinking about them, but then you obviously submit yourself into a place where, okay, now it's like, for the want of a better, there's you in a mirror in front of you and you're in your own mind with your own thoughts. So what was that strand of like in particular? Because I'm just very interested in myself, and I think a lot of people would have preconceptions or sort of stereotypes towards that environment. And just I'd be very interested to hear what it was like for a bucko from Wexford who'd gone travelling around the world to be in that space then. Yeah,
it's interesting, and it's part of the reason why I'm here in a way with you now, because I see what you're doing and I see the work you're doing, and I see that you've stepped forward into your truth or your authenticity or whatever it's described as. I see that you're doing that, and the GA public sees that you're doing that, and I have a respect for that. And I didn't know where I was going, but I stepped out, and as soon as I stepped out, stuff started opening up to me. Like I look back now and I see that all these things began to come to me, and one of the things that came to me was this Chilean character. Just a really interesting character, a man the same age as myself, who I met playing soccer in New York, and he was going to the temple, and I was going to South America at the time, and he was going to Southeast Asia to go to a temple and study and commit himself to some kind of monastic life for a while, just to kind of get a better handle on his own mind, I suppose. And he was talking about things that I had never heard other people talking about before in a way that made a lot of sense to me, just about presence and awareness and stillness and these things that before that, they just didn't register. I don't know had I read them before. I don't know had anybody else spoken about them before, but I didn't understand. This was the first time I had heard it, so I said, okay, this guy is a teacher of some sort, so I'm just going to go and see if I can spend some time with him on the road. And so I changed my flights from South America to Southeast Asia and went to this temple with him. And that was up at maybe 5 a.m. and was chanting for an hour and meditation for an hour and yoga for an hour. And we had maybe 2 bits of food. We go out on the arm rounds to the villages around where we collect food or donations or whatever and say blessings, I suppose, for the locals. And this is people now like literally with no socks on their feet, like, you know, the poorest of the poor in the country in Thailand. And so with the focus of meditation being that you just step back and realize that there is a thinker and there is a mind that is working and that you can actually observe that. And so for a young fella from Wexford town who had a million things going on in his head, for the first time I had a chance to actually step back and look in at what was going on. And before that, I was the thoughts, so I didn't have any awareness that I could be anything other than the actual thoughts. If I reacted to something, I was the reaction. I couldn't observe myself reacting. And if I was depressed about something or down about something, I couldn't observe myself being down about it because I was it. I didn't realise. Yeah. So the philosophies over there, I mean, you know, people, like when I came back, I remember Stephen Banville, who was hurling for Wexford at the time, saying to me, like, he gave me a nudge, and Stephen is a great character, you know, and he was obviously quoting something he'd heard, which he loved to do with me every now and then. And he was like, I heard Gizzy Lyng's a Buddhist. And I was like, Jesus, it's hilarious how twisted it gets so quickly, you know, because all it really was being in a room with people who said, look at this struggle that you're going through in your own mind, you don't need to do it. There's ways to not do it, and these are the ways. And this is not only your struggle, this is pretty much everybody's struggle. This is the entire human race's struggle. And you, just by doing a couple of things, quite simple things, but not easy to do. They're very simple, but they're not easy to do. You can shift that and you can change it. And so, I mean, that was healing for me, you know. That was, and the people here who I went to said, take that pill, you know, let's take more of that pill, take that. I said, but that's doing damage. I can feel it, like I'm thrown up when I take it. And they're saying, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a doctor, and you're a patient. You don't know. You take that pill. I said,
10 milligrams, 20 milligrams. We'll try 50. We'll try 100.
And that just kept going. And so here were people. So it's funny to come back to that kind of reception in a way, where people are kind of looking at you as if you're a little bit weird.
Yeah. And so what was that like then?
It was uncomfortable. Like, definitely was uncomfortable, but there was an assuredness there that hadn't been there before. And I went back in with Wexford when I came back. It's like, gee, when I think about it, I came back on a Tuesday morning. I was on the beach with the lads in there's a girl and 3 fellas from Holland, and I said, I'm going home, and I said, I'm done. I know what I'm doing. I want to go back and I want to play hurling this year. And, you know, and I said to 2 of the lads who were with me, I said, if I make it back, like, there's very little chance, it's February now, there's very little chance after being gone for a year and a half that I'll make it back into the senior team.
Speed,
But if I do, I'd love you to come over for the first game. And so I came back and changed my flights. I was going to go on to Sydney, because my plan at the time was like work in the wealthy countries and then not work in the poor countries, because you could last for longer. So I was going to go on and work and play hurling and all that stuff in Sydney, and then travel South America. But I realised I had to go home, and then in that time, like, you just couldn't write it. I was on the beach and I said, right, I decided, and the guy who was with me said, look, hold your horses, like, you know, let that sink in for a minute. Don't just change everything, like, you know, in one fell swoop, just because you've read a book that you thought was good. Like, you know, don't be too rash about this. You might want a bit of perspective. And I was like, okay, I'll pull back a little bit, and I'll give it a day, and I'll see. And this was at maybe about 11 o'clock in the morning, and I'd left the house at 10, and I had checked my emails in the place we were at. A house was a shack that we were staying in, and I opened when I got back to the house, this was about 12, I opened my computer again and checked my emails, and there was an email from Tomás Codd, who was a selector on the Wexford team at the time, who has never emailed me before and has never emailed me since, saying, this is your last call home. If you come back now, there's a chance you'll get back, but if you leave it any longer,
he's drawing the line, saying there's a cut-off point.
He's drawing the line and saying, come now. And I mean, I didn't need to hold my horses anymore. That was it. Like,
you take that as the sign of that.
I mean, Jenny, I couldn't not. Like, you know, it's an invite to come back. And so I just booked my flights from. I changed my flights. Malaysian Airlines were actually great, I have to say. They changed my flights from Sydney to Dublin. And I was on a flight, I'd say 2 days later, and I got home on a Tuesday morning. I was training at Wexford that Tuesday night, and just continued from there. And we played Offaly that year in the championship in 2012 in the first game, and I think we were beaten, and I missed 2 gilt-edged goal chances, and because I was off speed for the rest of the year. But the 2 Dutch lads came over and came to the game, and there was a nice bit of like, I can't decide sometimes whether to do the most basic things without worrying about which one I should have done or shouldn't have done. And I never questioned that once. That question had never arisen inside of me. Should I have come home or should I keep going? It was just it was the thing to do, and I was glad to get to go back and play in 2012.
Like, going straight back in there, does that, because look, so you've gone away to get out your bubble and to sort of get that sense, that discovery of self, and to broaden perspectives, and so coming back and jumping straight back in, does that really challenge those new strands of you in a way? Because you may have gone, but a dressing room sort of, okay, it evolves in bits and pieces, but it stays the same in a way too. Like, So those boys are coming back, and if you've been away for a year, I mean, I would have felt this at different times too. Like, people expect you to come back in and just sit in the same seat as you sat before you went, and you're still sort of, you know, the show's been going on, welcome back. So did that challenge you harder?
Well, I was sitting in the same seat again, but I was now sitting in the lotus position, and Liam Dunn is looking at me, and I swear he's thinking about killing me. Like, you know, I could swear he was thinking about firing whatever he had, whether it was a human or a hurl or whatever he could find at me, with a general cut of me in the lotus position at Wexford training. I mean, when I think, what was I thinking? Because like you take, anytime you've got this like progression or awakening of some sort, and everybody goes through them all the time, like, you know, different kind of puberties of thought, or, you know, you're these new thresholds that you pass. One of the things you do is internalize them. I think, you know, the ego is very quick to internalize them as, okay, I have this thing now, and I'm going to, and really you're just starting back the same process. Like you're just giving the reins over to the ego again to kind of. So that is a huge part of that, and you think everybody else around you is wrong, and I was very judgmental, and I remember going in at home thinking, like, let's use all of the things that we have. I'd become a fierce eco warrior, and myself as well, having gone back and seen the realities of the world, and so I was like, let's use everything we have. And so I went down out the back of the house in the home place at home, as I'd moved back in there, I suppose, when I got back. And I found like loads of cardboard, and I was like, oh, they'd burn the cardboard. And I went up, and I thought that was great. Like, my father kind of, Jesus, what's wrong with this fella? Like, so like there's just, it's so basic, but like it's so deceptive as well, because you actually think you're going on the right track, and then you start talking to other people who have had similar experiences of different types of awakenings, and they just say, oh yeah, that period where you come home where you think you know everything and everybody else is wrong. Oh yeah, that worked out well. Like hook, line and sinker. I went into it, you know. So but it's great, because when I did the program, the Ganzi, a couple of years ago, they came down, filmed at home with my parents, and one of the things they didn't include in the final cut, and I thought it was really the only valuable thing that came out of it in a way, with my family, was I was saying to my mother, like, how, because I think young men, like with their mothers, definitely, like you can lump a lot on them, like, you know. Now when I've had all these kind of projected failings, I was like, oh, it's your fault, like, you know. And so it was a kind of I wanted, throughout that documentary, anytime I was sitting with anybody, I wanted just to be fully bare with them, because it's just, there's no point in doing it otherwise. And I said to her, like, how did you deal with, you know, me coming back saying, like, being judgmental and being, and, you know, she had, you know, she's a mother, like, she has this experience behind her, and she just said, look, that's what we do, you know, that's what happens, and we could see that, but it's all in the name of progress or of development and everything else. So you just, you know, you just allow it to be. And I mean, look at, their parents are great that way. Like, they see the bigger game, they see the bigger picture, and they see it's the phase, and I see it now, and I know I'm sure it'll happen again. You try to protect against it, or try to be more aware of it, but it's just something that I think, you know, after a few weeks or days or whatever, if I don't do any kind of a practice, any, you know, yoga or meditation or anything like that, things that give my brain a bit of respite and let me be in my body and in myself more, my real sense of myself a little bit more, I start making decisions from my mind, and I live in my mind more. If I'm up in the city for a while, I find I'm in my mind an awful lot more, because I have to be to navigate the city. But I live in West Kerry now, and I get to be in my heart down there. I get to be in a part of me that maybe it would be more guarded in the city, because there's no fences down there, so you don't need to have those
literally freer. Like.
It I would say it is. I don't know.
And what's that like? And I suppose two questions is what drew you there, right? And I suppose, and what is that like?
Similar again. Like I went back to play in 2013, and we were training up in Patrick's Park in Enniscorthy, and we had the tackle bags out, and Matt Hanlon, I think, came into me with a shoulder, and I stood up to it, and we'd already done plenty of running at that stage as well, but I knew I was I just didn't feel strong, you know. And right. Matt hit me, but he didn't hit me in anything like what Matt could hit me, and I also had a tackle bag. But I ended up on the ground, and I couldn't get my breath, and I was really trying to go into the, you know, what I learned in Tibet about, you know, breathing techniques and stuff like that to get your body composed. But I wasn't able to get the breath into me, and so this was in December, and I was on my hands and knees, literally what felt like fighting for my life just to get the breath into my body.
Is there huge fear in that? There's obviously huge fear in that moment.
I mean, yeah, it's so raw, because the lads had all gone in. And this was still half an hour later. I mean, they couldn't stand around all night, and I was still out on the ground trying to just get my breath, and it was like the ground was frosty, and I was on my knees and my elbows, and I was still just trying to get the breath into my body and get any little ounce that I could. And I suppose it was confirmation that there's a change needs to come here. This is not going to. It was the end, and it was never really the end, and there was never an end. There was never that kind of closure in that I kind of walked away and said, okay, that's enough. It was just like I kind of kept going to training and trying to help out or trying to help the young fellas or whatever. And then in the end, Liam just asked me to I was probably, the things I was talking about at the time weren't what was being talked about in dressing rooms. And I think it was destabilising. Definitely for a manager, it was destabilising because...
What type of things are you talking about?
I think it was a lot around just presence and awareness, actually questioning things and looking at the dynamics of situations where managers were putting excess pressure on fellas, where there was too many demands on them, where they actually would... encouraging them to just step into their own power and use their own life force and their own soul force to actually interact with training and interact with the game in a way that was more enjoyable and more open and more joyful, because at the time it wasn't a very joyful thing to play for Wexford because we weren't winning anything, and there was a lot of training that was going on, and not a lot of people weren't putting it in, and some people were, and that creates divisions. You know what that's like, you experience that yourself, and those frustrations were there, and when those frustrations are building, then it becomes less enjoyable, and we're going there pretty much 7 nights a week to something that's not enjoyable. And so I was trying to make people aware of that, I suppose, and to question these things in a way, because I didn't feel as owned by the management, or I didn't have that pressure that I had before about having to play. So I was talking about those things, and that wasn't I don't think that was particularly popular. I remember being at a meeting actually one time. We had a sports psychologist in with us, and there was a question asked of what we felt about some game we'd played that we'd been beaten in, and nobody answered for about 5 minutes, or two, it seemed like 5 minutes, maybe it was only a minute, and I was trying to hold back because I knew I was speaking too much, but I just couldn't understand. I couldn't for the life of me understand how this thing that burns so brightly and so strongly inside of us, how you couldn't have a barrage of opinions, a barrage of ideas, that you just wouldn't come completely to life about what was going wrong, why it was going wrong, and how we could fix it. And we'd had Paddy Butler, and I saw the moment that it happened in 2013. I saw the moment that it happened. I had experience of it at this stage, and I saw the moment that it happened because Paddy Butler came in and he did a wall session with us, and it was brilliant. And Paddy does things in a different way, and he speaks to people in a different way, and he speaks with great respect and great reverence to people. And in other ways he doesn't, but he does as well in training because it comes from such a good place in him. Yeah. And he was asking lads, what did you think of that session? And like grown men, 28 years of age, putting their head down, saying, "Oh yeah, that was
not articulating
that was fine." Like whatever. Yeah, and so he was like, "No, sorry, Diarmuid. I asked you, what did you think of that?
Yes.
Look at me when you're speaking to me." And I was like, "Oh, this is great. Now we've somebody who's like really calling us in and demanding that we're there with them." And I just thought, this is going to go. This is going to be brilliant. And it was only 13 or 14 of us because it was one of the early training sessions. And he was like, "Look, I'm going to be with you every now and then, but in the meantime, the next night of training, like it starts off with this intensity, because the intensity of the training session was magic, only because he was addressing realities. Like he wasn't doing anything. There was no magic. Like it was very, very simple. Be here." Find the enjoyment in it and go after whatever you have. And I was like, great, this is it, this is what we need. And then we trained in Patrick's Park the following week on a Tuesday night, and there was I could see the body language of the players. They were just banging the ball back and forth. And I was like, how do you forget? How do you forget like that when you go? And that's what we did at the ball alley. It was down in Pearsestown in my home club actually. I was like, how do you go when you
back
go
to the other
like
thing?
that? How, when you get that level of enjoyment, because there is only enjoyment in when you really, like, we're here to work, we're here to work. We're here to do our work in the world, and then when we're playing games, we're also there to work. And it's not a work in a negative sense, like the work you go to in your office. If you don't like your job, work is a disaster. But when you do, it's not work, so it's work to do the thing that you want to do. And it seemed like everybody was going to just I had a vision of it, like just going so well. I just thought, this is it. Like 2013 is going to be magic. And I could see young fellas coming. Lee Chin was around the panel at the time coming in, and I could see some talent. I knew Conor Mack was coming. I knew these fellas were coming. So I was like, here we go. This is great. And the following Tuesday, it was flat. And I was like, okay, there you go. Like that's the level, and maybe just acceptance of that will resolve some of your tension with this game that you love. And in the end, the game spat me out, and I couldn't do any more physically, and so I had to leave it. And I never really left, or I didn't retire, and I felt I'd had a good 10 years. Like I felt I'd worked really hard, and I felt that some acknowledgement of that would have been nice in a way. Maybe that's arrogant to expect that or something, I don't know, but I feel like at the end a testimonial is a great article, I think, by Kieran Cunningham today, who was talking about the Gooch's testimonial. He was saying that a different type of testimonial is what players need when they finish, and it's kind of like it's the reinstitution of ritual into Irish life in some way, that when you finish something, you cross over that threshold of that's the end, and you close that chapter, because so many players don't know how to close it, and they step over that without realising they've stepped over something, and they continue it into their lives, and it causes a lot of distress and a lot of damage, not only to themselves but to the people around them. And that's where I think gambling, alcohol addictions come from, is that distress that's caused by not really realising that your time is up and you move on to a different stage of your career. So I found myself out on Curracloe Beach one night where I dug a hole for myself, and I brought out a little bit of gear and a couple of old hurls and started a fire on the beach and burned a few things, and that was my ritual to say, like, okay, I finally need to let go of
closure.
This. Like, this needs to be closure. I can't come back and it's done. But I stood over the little hole that I had dug, and I had the hurl in my hand, like, and I just couldn't burn the hurl. Like, no way could I burn the hurl. And I'm glad that I didn't, because I mean, why would you, why would you ever burn a hurl? Like, the most beautiful thing you could have in your hand, like, I'd probably burn some of those plastic ones, all right, but that's a different story. But now looking at, where we are with the ash tree and with Ash Dieback and the threat that's there to the hurl, like, you kind of realise the sacredness of it. And I know that's I know probably GA people, I don't know how much time the hurling people really have for that idea, like, of how special the hurl is, and not just the hurl, what it comes from. Like, it comes from this living thing, like the ash tree that's dotted around this country and has been for centuries upon centuries. And that's a really important thing, to acknowledge that. And we've got this serious disease now, and people are trying, and they are trying to remedy it, but it's not really coming forward. And I think we need to get to the stage, where every child starts playing hurling in this country needs to plant an ash tree when they start, and to watch that ash tree grow as they grow as well, and to have that link with which is essentially the essence of our game. This hurl.
So before you zone out of this podcast and go back to everyday life, I just have one or two quick things I want to say. Firstly, thank you for your time and for choosing to listen to the Real Talks podcast. We live in a society now where we're constantly told that shorter is better, and we get soundbites forced down our throats. And I find it truly humbling that over 50,000 times someone somewhere around the world has sat down to press play on one of these conversations with our GA heroes. Secondly, I want to thank Diarmuid for his honesty and fascinating insight into sport, life, identity, meditation, and a whole lot more. It's a conversation I took an awful lot from myself, and I really hope you did too. Lastly, if you have any feedback or questions, drop me a line on Twitter at AOMTheCat, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes or SoundCloud by searching for Real Talks. You can also find Diarmuid on Twitter at Diarmuid Lyng. That's Diarmuid. Lyng, obviously. My name is Alan O'Mara, and thanks for listening to episode 17 of the Real Talks podcast.